Hey guys, I'm a big believer in starting on time, so we are going to get started pretty much right away with chapter 6. So I have to update the video title from yesterday to show that we did chapters 4 and 5 instead of just chapter 4. But on days when there's a shorter chapter, like we will have this Friday, I'll do double chapters. And I'll try to read ahead a little bit to let you know when that's going to be, or schedule ahead a little bit to let you know when that's going to be. But for today, it's just going to be the one, chapter 6 of Breadcrumbs. Now, yesterday, if you weren't able to catch up or if you forgot where we were, if you have anything that you remember important from yesterday, you can drop it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just give you my synopsis. Because I remember certainly yesterday, Hazel threw a snowball at her best friend Jack, and it hit him right in the eye. Something got in his eye, and now Jack's acting weird. He's leaving her behind when he wouldn't before. He's hanging out with the boys who are always cruel to Hazel, and that's just not what best friends should do. Good morning. Last but not least, we heard about somebody or something called Mal. Now, Mal is, sorry, I keep bumping my guitar. Let me move it. Mal is kind of a demon and kind of a goblin and kind of something a whole lot worse. And he had something in particular that he was using to cause mischief. Mal's got a mirror. And when beautiful things look in the mirror, they look ugly. And when ugly things look in the mirror, they look hideous. Whew. Now, a shard of that mirror fell to earth as he was trying to reflect the whole thing. And we have been led to believe that that shard is what got into Jack's eye. But we'll see what kind of an impact that has today. Chapter 6, Cast-Offs. Hazel walked in the front door of her house, trailing snow behind her. Her feet were soaked in their sneakers, and she was shivering underneath her thin shirt. She didn't really care. Her mom was already at her desk in the living room doing work. She looked up as her daughter walked in. "You don't have a jacket," she exclaimed. "I left it at school, remember?" "Oh, Hazel," she shook her head. "You're shivering. Come in and get warm. Wasn't Jack home?" Hazel looked at the ground. He had Bobby and Tyler over. There, that was true. "Oh?" her mom said. It was an O with a question attached. "Yeah," Hazel added quickly. "They were going to go sledding, and, she gestured to her jacketless body. I don't have my stuff." Her mother perked up. "Well, that was sensible of you, Haze. You're making good choices." Hazel grimaced. In books, a good choice is choosing to go fight the dragon. In Hazel's life, it's not going sledding because you left your boots at school. And of course, she hadn't made that choice at all. In real life, you don't get to make choices. You're just not invited. "Do you need the desk to do your homework?" her mother said, motioning in front of her. Even if she wanted to, Hazel couldn't do her homework because it was still in her backpack in Mrs. Jacobs' room. It didn't matter. They were already going to send her to the school counselor. She was already a problem. She might as well start acting like it. "No, I don't." "Honey," her mother tilted her head. "Are you all right?" Hazel shrugged. "Sure." She looked away so her mom wouldn't see the lie on her face, then excused herself and went into her room, closing the door behind her. She lay down on the bed, moving her pile of stuffed animals aside. She reached over to grab one of them, but Jack's words rang in her head. "Stop being such a baby." Her hand retracted, and she wrapped her arms around her chest and hugged herself. There was a niffling in her stomach, chomping away at everything around it. Tears filled her eyes, and she squeezed them away. She was not a baby. She was Hazel, and Jack was her best friend. Why would he act like that? In the back of her mind, she heard Adelaide's uncle's voice. Why? That's the question. There was a reason. People don't just change like that. Jack wouldn't be mean to her. He just wasn't himself. He could have been in shock still. She would be in shock too if she'd gotten glass in her eye. Maybe they'd given him some medication that made him weird. That happened all the time. Or maybe he was trying to keep her out of his house, and like there was some kind of secret there, something bad, but he had to keep her safe for her own protection, and that was the only way to do it. He'd explain tomorrow. He'd explain and apologize. She just had to wait. Hazel woke up the next morning, and the monster in her stomach immediately chomped down. Everything clenched up, and 2 moments later, she remembered why. She went to her window to find that ice had covered the world. The huge icicles hung down from rows of houses like spikes. The trees looked as if they'd been mummified. Ice coated Hazel's window, and she wondered if the whole house was encased in it. They would open the front door only to find a foot-thick wall blocking them from everything beyond it. They'd peer at the world beyond, but would only be able to see blurs and splotches, and soon they would forget what it was like to see things for what they were. Hazel looked over at Jack's house. She didn't know what she was expecting to see, maybe a banner hanging from the window reading, "I'm sorry, Hazel, I didn't mean it." That would have been the best thing. But it wasn't there. She left her room feeling a little like she was crossing a moat, except the alligators were all inside her, snapping away. She had breakfast, then her mom emerged from the basement holding something puffy and purple. "I found your old jacket. Good thing I didn't give it away yet." Hazel stared. The jacket shone. "I can't wear that." "Why not? I know it's small. It was small last year." "It's too—" Hazel shook her head. "Babyish," she thought. "You loved this 2 years ago," her mom said with a little smile. "I can't let you freeze to death, honey. It's just for the morning." Soon Hazel was dressed in her third-grade jacket. It went down to her mid-waist and her wrists stuck out. She looked like a puffy purple pauper. Her mom then produced a hot pink hat with purple stars embroidered on it and sparkly silver strands in the puff on top and hot pink mittens to match. Hazel could only dress herself slowly in her brightly hued humiliation. She tried to put on the glittery boots her mother gave her, but couldn't get her feet into them. She looked up at her mom. Her mom closed her eyes. "All right," she said. "I'll drive you." Even the half of her that was desperate to see Jack at the bus stop, to hear his explanation, to get as quickly as possible to the moment when everything was all right again, didn't want to do so dressed like an 8-year-old's birthday hat. "Thanks, Mom," she muttered. Hazel had always felt invisible when she walked into school alone, and she thought that was the best way, or the worst way that you could possibly feel. That was before she'd turned into a walking pink and purple glitter marshmallow. "Oh, hey, great job on almost doing all the stuff for this week. If you need any help, I'll be live on Google tomorrow. So I'm going to go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at my calendar right under you at noon. Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon. Be there. I will post the link in Google Classroom." All Hazel could do was keep her head down and count the steps to the school while her mother watched out the car window, not understanding that freezing to death would be better than this. Just in front of the entrance to the school, her sneakered foot landed on a patch of ice. Her back slammed against the ground. Hazel lay there as elementary school students gathered around her, and it seemed that not even the third graders were dressed as ridiculously as she was. Hazel slowly picked herself up and headed into the school, her body now feeling as beat up as her heart. As soon as she crossed through the front door, she shed herself of the accoutrement of her absurdity and had to fight the urge to dump them behind a wastebasket. Her sneakers were soaked from the snow. Her jeans were wet from the encounter with the ice. She felt like slush. She walked through the hallways alone. She had done this before, but there was always the idea of Jack, a ghost of him that grinned as it accompanied her. She wondered if people could hear the pounding of her heart, if the monstrous thrumming that caused the kindergartners in the classroom to look around wide-eyed with fear as she passed, if the before-school care kids in the music room unwittingly began to shake their maracas in time with it, if soon the very walls of the building would shake with it. She went up to Jack's classroom and peered through the window. He was there, just as he was supposed to be. She thought at him as hard as she could. 1 moment, 2, 3, 5. He didn't turn around. Hazel shrank backward. She walked into her classroom, breathing ice. Someone mumbled, "Tyler, she's got a pencil case. Duck," and someone else cackled. Hazel flinched. She'd forgotten that part. She crawled into her desk and began to fiddle with the backpack she'd left there the day before while people whispered around her. And then Mrs. Jacobs was standing over her. "Good morning, Hazel," she said, carefully articulating every word. And then she stopped and stood in silence. She said nothing else, nothing about the day before. An artificial smile spread across her face, and Hazel got the feeling she was supposed to congratulate the teacher on her generosity. Hazel looked down and got out her notebook, and Mrs. Jacobs turned away. The bell rang, and the teacher began to talk, and Hazel's brain identified her voice as background noise and moved it to the rear of her consciousness. Hazel looked out the window, wondering how many cars she would watch pass by until recess when she saw Jack again. What would he say to her? Would he try to explain? Or maybe he would pretend it had never happened? Maybe he didn't even remember. Maybe he'd been in so much shock that he had amnesia. That would explain a lot. Hazel would understand. She'd never even tell him how he'd acted. She'd keep it secret for the rest of her days. Her eyes fell on the trees that lined the sidewalk. Ice had colonized them like alien goo. She wondered what they felt. Were they cold underneath all of that, chilled to the roots, or did they feel safe now? Hazel, snapped Mrs. Jacobs, what do I have to do to get you to pay attention? You're supposed to be taking notes. Please get out a pencil. We'll wait for you. Snickers, whispers, and the hum of impatience from Mrs. Jacobs. Psycho, hissed Bobby. Hazel opened her desk. Her pencil box was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Jacobs cleared her throat. I don't have anything to write with, Hazel mumbled. Her skin felt like it was burning from the force of the 30 pairs of eyes fixed on her. I see, said Mrs. Jacobs. Her mouth tightened, and Hazel heard all of the things she was not saying. Would someone loan Hazel a pencil, please? Hazel's skin seared. 1 moment, 2. Then next to her, Michaela leaned over. Here you go, she said softly. She blinked and added, I have highlighters too, if you need them. Hazel nodded, unable to speak. Then a hiss from behind her. I don't know, Tyler, that looks pretty sharp. Yeah, be careful, man. Girls with pencils are pretty fierce. Hazel whirled around in her seat to find Tyler's face had turned red, and he was staring intently at the desk in front of him. And then she understood. Jack was mad at her for throwing her pencil case at Tyler. It made sense. Since she'd come to Lovelace, he'd had to negotiate things with them delicately so he didn't hurt their feelings. Boys were very sensitive. And Jack did it. He did a really good job. He played with her at recess and sat with them on the bus. But then Hazel had to go and embarrass Tyler in front of the whole class, and that put Jack in a really bad position. The ice inside her melted away. This she could fix. She would apologize to Jack, and then everything would be okay again. Hazel pressed her legs together and tried not to fidget in her chair. She was going to have to survive until recess when she could see Jack. She would apologize, and then she would tell him to go off and play football with the boys so then everyone would feel better, especially Hazel, because it feels good to apologize. It feels good to do the right thing. Hazel was making good choices. Hazel realized her fingers were beating a rapid rhythm on the desk. She covered the offending hand with her other one, took a deep breath, and forced herself to look at Mrs. Jacobs. The teacher had put images of what looked like crystal snowflake ornaments on the overhead projector. Do you see that every single one of them has the same number of sides? She was saying. 6, right? This is called hexagonal symmetry. The words burst out of Hazel's mouth. Mrs. Jacobs blinked. Very good, Hazel. Hexagon for 6-sided, and symmetry meaning the sides are exactly the same. A snowflake is mathematically perfect. In the media, you'll see drawings of snowflakes that are 8-sided, but you'll know that this is scientifically inaccurate. She smiled at the class as if she had given them a great gift. Now, these photographs of snowflakes were taken by a scientist named Wilson Bentley over 100 years ago. They called him Snowflake Bentley, and he was the one who discovered that no two snowflakes were alike. Mrs. Jacobs began to yammer on about the formation of snowflakes, supercooled droplets, layers of atmosphere, blah, blah, which was the same information Hazel had ignored from her mother 3 days ago. Hazel impatiently drew some snowflakes on her notebook. She was careful to make them 8-sided. Finally, it was time for recess, and Hazel sprang out of her chair and gathered her things. Outside, she darted over to the big slide to wait for Jack. Mr. Williams's class emerged out the back door, and Hazel stood on her tiptoes, scanning the faces. He wasn't there, and then he was. Hazel's heart sped up, and it was all she could do to keep from jumping and waving. Jack stopped and looked around. His eyes passed right over the big slide and Hazel and moved on, stopping at the edge of the fence. A grin spread across his face, and he ran toward the boys that congregated there. Hazel squeezed her eyes shut. Of course he wouldn't come. It was only natural. He was still mad. She wasn't afraid. She marched right over to the boys who were huddled together laughing. She tapped Jack on the shoulder. He turned around and looked at her blankly. Jack, she said, straightening, I'm sorry I threw a pencil box at Tyler. It put you in a bad position. I should have thought about you. I was a bad friend, and I'm sorry. There, Hazel smiled. Jack raised his eyebrows and looked at Tyler. She threw a pencil box at you? Tyler rolled his eyes. Yep. Psycho, Bobby muttered under his breath. Jack cocked his head at Hazel. Why are you apologizing to me? Oh, Hazel said. A tendril of something began to rise up in her stomach. Right. She turned to look at Tyler. Tyler, I'm sorry I threw a pencil case at you. Tyler wrinkled up his nose. All right, he said. Hazel looked back at Jack. The tendril was at her heart now. He shrugged at her. Okay, well, see ya, Hazel. And then the boys ran off. Hazel spent the rest of the day encased in ice. She didn't talk to anyone, as you would expect from someone encased in ice. She looked out of the window and understood now how the trees felt. Not chilled, not safe, just somehow disconnected from everything. Today was a bus day, and she took her seat early and glued her eyes out the window so she didn't have to see Jack. She heard him, though, as he approached, snickering with the other boys. There was a banging sound, and the boys all laughed, and Jack's laughter was the loudest of all. She kept her eyes where they were, but her foolish heart still sped up, thinking he might choose today to sit next to her. He did not. Hazel bit down hard on her lip and watched the world go by. At school, she was so good at looking out the window and tuning everything else out. She was a professional. She could teach a class. But not here. Here on the bus, the raucous voices of the boys in the back slapped against her like an angry sea. In the air around her, Jack laughed, Jack hooted, Jack cackled, Jack snickered. Jack was a whole thesaurus entry of glee, and Hazel could only let the waves batter her. She had no idea that before that day, how long the bus ride was, how slowly the driver moved through the streets. Every stop was a lifetime. The brakes creaked. The stop sign on the side of the bus inched its way into place, struggling to push past the uncompromising air. The bus door opened with a hissing psst, like it was telling a secret. The first graders gathered their things, thing at a time, and stumbled by with their tiny little legs. Down the stairs, out the door, in front of the bus. The blinkers ticked perpetually. Out onto the sidewalk. Psst, the door closed. The stop sign inched its way back, the bus trembled, and then plodded down a block or two to do it all again. Finally, they got to their block, and with a creak, push, tick, tick, psst, it was time for Hazel to get off. She gathered her things with the precision and care of a first grader, but it didn't matter. Jack burst through the aisle as if he'd been shot from a cannon and was off the bus and down the sidewalk in a blink. The Revere twins followed, and Hazel picked up her backpack and headed home alone. When Hazel walked in the house, her mom was sitting at the desk. She smiled when she saw her daughter. "Oh, honey, And Hazel started to cry. "What's wrong? Hazel, sweetie." Her mother's face looked stricken, as if seeing her daughter this way was the worst thing that could possibly happen, and Hazel could do nothing but tell her the truth. "Jack isn't talking to me," she said. Hazel's mom led her to the couch and sat down right next to her. "What do you mean? Did you guys have a fight?" "No," Hazel exclaimed, wiping her eyes. "He just stopped talking to me. He was mean." "Oh, baby," her mom said, her voice cracking a little. "I'm so sorry." "Something's wrong," Hazel said. "He wouldn't just do that. He's my best friend." "Oh, Hazel," her mother shook her head. "You know, this is so hard. It's one of the really hard things about growing up. Sometimes your friends change." "What?" "Well, sometimes when you get older, you grow apart." Hazel straightened and stared at her mother. "Overnight?" She shrugged. "Maybe. You guys have been two peas in a pod for so long. Maybe Jack decided he needed to have some friends who are boys. It's natural for someone Jack's age." "But," Hazel said, "he has friends who are boys. He just likes me better." Her mom gazed at her, lips pressed together, and Hazel could hear all the things she wasn't letting herself say. "Hayes, dear," she said finally, "Jack's going through a lot, you know. It's got to be so hard for him." "Yeah, but that's why he needed her. You just wait and see what happens. If he's a true friend, he'll come back." "He is a true friend." Hazel mentally stomped her foot. "Well, good." She stroked Hazel's shoulder. "And in the meantime, you can make other friends. You had fun with Adelaide, didn't you? We'll go to the Briggs tomorrow." Hazel felt the tears come again, and she put her head in her hands. "Oh, sweetie," her mom said, hugging her. "This happens. I'm so sorry it happened to you." And Hazel could see that she was sorry. She meant everything she said, but her mom didn't know. She didn't really know Jack. Jack was her best friend. He wasn't going to leave her because he was going through a lot, and he was not going to grow out of her overnight like she was an old puffy purple jacket. It didn't make sense at all. And we'll pick up there tomorrow with Chapter 7, The Witch. If you have any predictions for who the witch is, you can leave them in the chat or in the comments below. Or if you have any idea of where this is all going, let me know. If you're in my class, I will see you tomorrow. I'll be at my email today, of course, from 1 to 4, or I'll see you tomorrow for our live Google Meet and for Nitro Type again in the morning at 10. Hope to see you there. Have a great day. Bye, hon.